To Sudan now, and the United Nations is warning that the escalating humanitarian disaster there could force more than 800,000 people to flee. The UN says more than 330,000 have been internally displaced and over 100,000 have already crossed the border from Sudan into neighbouring countries. In the capital, Khartoum, fighting continues despite promises of a ceasefire. As foreign nationals attempt to flee, a US ship from Port Sudan has arrived in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia on Monday. There were 300 evacuees on the ship, including 100 US citizens. And the final 2 evacuation flights for British nationals also left on Monday. Those unable to leave by plane are taking boats. The British government estimates that around 4,000 Britons were stuck in Sudan and more than half of them have now been evacuated. Well, this is the scene live in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, right now, where there is a nominal ceasefire still in place, but we know that fighting has very much continued there. We can see plumes of smoke in the distance, which no doubt will relate to the ongoing conflict there. Well, as Sudan's rival leaders agree to send representatives to begin negotiations, our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams has more.
There's been a kind of tentative agreement in the last couple of days among the the 2 warring parties to send representatives. The UN says that agreement exists in principle, but that nothing has actually been arranged in terms of where and when the 2 sides sit down. So we need to watch that to see if that firms up. But certainly an offer has been on the table from South Sudan and I think also from Saudi Arabia to host talks between the 2 sides. And at some point, amid pretty concerted international pressure, one hopes that those talks will indeed take place, but no concrete plans just yet.
And what do we know about fighting, not just in Khartoum, but across the country, despite the fact there is a supposed ceasefire taking place?
Yeah, it's become a very familiar pattern, hasn't it, of talk of ceasefires, and yet that familiar scene across the northern reaches of Khartoum with black smoke drifting across the city. That particular part of the capital has remained a hot spot throughout this past 2 weeks, as has the situation in the far west in Darfur, where the clash between the army and the rapid support forces seems to have triggered an outbreak of tribal violence, which has left a lot of people dead out there, causing great concern among aid agencies, as around 20,000 people have fled across the border into Chad. So those have been the 2 principal areas of concern. There have been other clashes elsewhere, but that is where most of the fighting is focused. Of course, the fear on the international community, or from the international community, is that if these tentative prospects for some kind of dialogue don't materialize, the whole situation could spread and escalate. And that's why we heard yesterday from the UNHCR, the UN's refugee agency, a warning that as many as 800,000 people could be on the move, which would obviously represent a major escalation in this crisis.
And an increasingly desperate humanitarian crisis. The World Food Programme say they are expecting to resume their efforts today after they were paused when several of their representatives were killed. What do we know about what they're going to be able to manage to do, how many people they'll be able to reach?
Well, that second part of that question is the all-important one, because yes, we are seeing signs of a kind of mobilization of the international community in terms of aid. The Red Cross bringing in medical supplies into Port Sudan a couple of days ago. As you say, the World Food Programme now feeling that it can resume its operations. But the key thing for all of the agencies involved, it's not just bringing aid in, which presumably they can do to Port Sudan. It's whether they can then get it to people, particularly in the capital, Khartoum, where in those areas around the northern parts of the city where you've had street battles between the 2 military factions, whether it's possible to get aid in there safely. The World Food Programme doesn't want another 3 of their workers killed as they experienced 2 weeks ago. They want to know that the situation is sufficiently calm for them to get their operations running again, The same applies to the medical side of things, with hospitals that have been out of action. Can those now start resuming proper operations? All of these questions are still very much up in the air and the focus of quite concerted international effort.
Paul Adams there. Well, as I said, there is a nominal ceasefire taking place across the country, but there has been, according to local residents, the sound of sporadic gunfire across Khartoum. And as you can see there, plumes of smoke in the distance there, with local residents also saying there has been the roar of warplanes. Well, let's go live now to Hajooj Kuka, who's an award-winning filmmaker helping the Khartoum Emergency Response Room from Berlin. He's based in Khartoum but has been stranded in Berlin since the 15th of April. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. Just explain to us what these emergency response rooms are, how they work.
Okay, as you heard, the UN doesn't have access to these people. And right now in Khartoum is a city that has between 8 and 10 million people. So people have been able to sustain and remain by getting together and creating these neighborhood response rooms. They're the same groups that ousted Omar al-Bashir. They did great protests. There were the groups that were protesting against the coup from October 25th. And they came together, and in my neighborhood, they took a school, a primary school, they took it over, and they started figuring out, how do you have water? How do you get the water company to work? How do you get electricity? How do you get food in the grocery stores? They set up small little emergency, if somebody gets injured, if somebody needs some medicine and stuff like that. So they got together and they started doing that, and they started organizing across the neighborhoods. For example, in Bahari, they had this big issue where the water supply got destroyed because the area where most people live in Bahari is controlled by the militia, the Rapid Response Force, while the area where the water storage is controlled by the army. So they actually went there, the emergency response rooms, talked to the militia, then talked to the army, and then negotiated that somebody calls in to fix it when there's a ceasefire. As you heard, the ceasefire never actually existed. So until now, they're waiting for cessation of hostilities and real ceasefire so the workers can go in and fix it. But this is the kind of different work that they've been doing. And the strength of it is because in every neighborhood, there's doctors, there's engineers, there's all these people who are stranded and in their neighborhood. So they've been coming together to these response rooms and working.
Are they able to provide supplies? And if so, how are they getting supplies to help other people?
So this is the amazing thing. So there are different ways to do it. One, they were actually contacting wholesalers who have storage rooms, big storage warehouses, that normally they would sell in markets, but these markets don't exist anymore. So they've been contacting them to get some of the stuff. So there is that. Also, the Rapid Response Force, the militia, they actually agreed to have some of the markets open and to transfer some of the goods. So it's always been like this constant negotiation, constant figuring out how to do it. And up to now, they've managed. It's only been 2.5 weeks, so there's been enough material in Sudan to do it. But soon they will need actually for stuff to come from outside, which is going to be a harder negotiation that requires international and the UN and whatnot in it. But up to now, they've been successful in utilizing what's in Sudan. Let's also remember that in Khartoum, there's also farms within the city limits. So these farms were able to bring their goods. So until now, there are some markets that are working. They're really tense, but they are working under the protection and the supervision of the different army, whatever, is it RSF or the army that exists in the area. Through the constant negotiation with the emergency response rooms.
Hajooj, tell us about your personal circumstances. I said that you're stuck in Berlin, and now since you've been there, this fighting has continued. What are your thoughts about trying to get back to Sudan, and what are you doing to try and improve the situation from where you are in Germany?
So me personally, I was on the 15th, I haven't even checked in, and I was heading back home when the war started. So I got stuck outside, and because I was so connected with people in my neighborhood and with different committees, resistance committees, I was able to, through phone calls, through connecting, trying in the beginning to helping people get out, helping my mother get out. She made it through the border, and she's in Aswan. trying to figure out with my friends and my loved ones what to do. And then slowly it went to the no war campaign, doing graffiti in the walls, trying to like figure out how to get money across. The banking system has collapsed. So I've been mainly thanks to all these technologies that we have, like through WhatsApp, through Telegram, through getting Zoom calls, trying to like organize people on the ground and being a point where I'm online while when bombings happen in certain areas, they get offline. So trying to do that. So I've been mainly like just communicating all the time and trying to get people to do things. Also being a filmmaker, I've been trying to encourage people to document what they're going through and putting together a lot of the documentation that's happening. So we have to tell our stories and not just get that lost, because it's very important to tell this story of all what's happening, but also of resistance. Sudan is going towards democracy, and the army. This seems to be the last time the armies can rule in Sudan. We're hoping after this war ends, this will be the end of military rule, and this is the last time that people would go to using weapons to solve our problems.
Hajooj Kuka, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Well, the continuation of the fighting is, as you can see, very much ongoing. Reports of sporadic gunfire across the capital, Khartoum, plumes of smoke being seen. 100,000 people have fled the country, 300,000 internally displaced.